Okay, I'm gonna assume it's probably rolling, and if not, it will get to it shortly. I do want to double check real quick. Let's just real quick make sure. Okay, so I saw this interesting bit of rhetoric coming from DeSantis, and I saw it on Anomaly's page. So, I'm kind of a couple layers removed. I'm getting news from memes, kind of the worst case scenario, but I did look it up. I've got a couple other things pulled up. So it's interesting though. You should own your home free and clear, blah blah blah. Yeah, okay, great. Well, it's you know, it's funny that, being an anarchist for going on 12, 13 years or something like that, to hear that actually coming from like some big name politician in the mainstream media, to actually, I mean, the implications of that, even though he clearly cannot articulate the actual argument, he kind of comes up at the end, right? You should own your home. So it's like you're assuming then, right? So you're likening rent to taxes, or rather the other way around, taxation you're likening to rent in that sense. So, okay, you don't own it if you have to pay taxes. Um, and of course, the statist would view it that way because minarchists even view it that way, because they will talk about how it's you don't own your home, and really the position is it's extortion, right? Because if it is, you should, if you don't own your home, so called free and clear, like if you're not going to say that that's outright extortion, then you are saying that you're renting from the state, right? You can't have that both ways. It can't be you should own your home as though you don't right now, and also that's immoral. or also taxation is theft, right? It can only be taxation or theft, or it's not. Um, and it's just funny because you get more obviously self-contradictory when it comes to the entire concept of taxation, but most importantly, when it comes to these guys, migration regulation, because it's the exact same logic as this. Migration regulation, or immigration control as they call it, implies that you don't own anything. So if the state has the right to control migration, then it surely has the right to impose so-called property taxes. It can't be one or the one, you know, you can't be the state cannot have the right to prevent who can even come onto the so-called property, but then doesn't have the right to charge people admittance, right? Or charge people rent is what they're basically likening to. So, just it's crazy that it's so obvious, just in your face these days, because they're starting to use more libertarian and anarchist rhetoric in the news. So, because to liken property tax to rent is something that's gone on in the more laissez-faire and more so-called radical-minded people for the longest, and maybe in the back of the bar room or whatever, smoky bar rooms, whatever that phrase is. But people, when you would say that, people would call you nuts. Like, what do you mean? It's property tax, blah, 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 blah. And they don't even realize that they've kind of broken out of that psychosis, but they're still in the overall delusion, right? Like, because I'm going to go here, over here says free and clear. This guy, um, homestead exemption is great, but the homestead is limited in terms of how much benefits you get. Like, what, what benefit are you getting to not have to pay as high rent, according to his outlook on the world? Because he's acting like property tax isn't extortion. It's just a bad idea tax that should have never got done, right? Like, I mean, yeah, that ultimately that's true, but that applies to all taxation, and it applies to migration regulation too, because it's all based on the same idea that the state is the so-called collective, the manager of our so-called collective property, which they perceive to be the so-called country, which they equate with the land territory. Um, Exemption removes 25,000 off the assessed value of an owner-occupied home, condominium, blah blah blah. Also provides another 25K additional exemption of assessed value over 50. So okay, but he says, right, he's basically, he's making sense as far as, well, if your property tax goes up more, or I mean, if you're bah, I can't speak right now apparently. If the assessed value of your home goes up to where, that's not really going to help you, then right, that's a good point. The problem is just the ultimately entirely self-contradictory worldview here. I'm not saying that getting rid of property taxes is a bad thing at all. I'm saying that keep going and realize that I can make this same exact argument, and I do, when it comes to absolutely any tax, because it's all the same idea. And here's another thing too. I saw somebody post. Let me go back to Anomalies page because people are just they don't get it, and I'm sure I could find something in here that I could tear apart or whatever. But um, he's exactly right. Once your homeland is paid, you shouldn't have to keep paying property taxes. Well, yeah, it's wild that you can say that and not really understand what is going on in reality, which is it's just extortion. It's like everybody's property taxes, property taxes, property taxes. Well, it's either rent or it's extortion. Property tax is a nonsense concept that spawns only because they believe that the state is authority. And it's different than some gang or some mob just coming up and saying, we want to build a school and you're going to pay or we're going to use force to take you out of your house. And another thing is, the reason I went back to this, somebody on here said, well, they're just going to replace it with another tax. Yeah, probably. Uh, but at least they won't take your home. And I'm pretty sure you have a question mark on the end of it, but maybe not. But well, the thing is that doesn't matter. Like they can still come take your house. Like if for not paying any other so-called tax, they can levy that upon you and take whatever they want. They have their rules and their procedures, but nothing says that they can't come take your house. The IRS come take your house. The county will come take your house for not paying other various taxes. So there's nothing about this that says they can't take your house. The state can basically take whatever they decide. Um, so they're trying to make sense of it, but they don't understand the underlying problem. So it's just like, yeah, that's a good idea. The state shouldn't charge me so-called property tax, but these other taxes are okay. When really it's all the same logic, right? Like, and again, I always go this route with the conservatives: is if the state has the right to control migration, surely it has the right to impose a minimum wage. Like, you can't pick and choose that. Like, you're making an ownership claim. So the only reason that the state, like under their framework, right? Like, okay, they believe in migration regulation, they believe in the state, they believe in the Democratic Republic or the Republic or whatever, and their constitution and all that stuff. So, I mean, there's nothing in there that says that they couldn't impose a minimum wage. There's nothing in there that says that they couldn't just nationalize industry, because the entire premise that they accept is that the state has the right to impose regulations across the entire land. And they do have like a concept of separation in their mind where they view certain things as wrong that the state shouldn't do, but it's really not all that fleshed out in their mind because, I mean, look at where we're at. I mean, they can't distinguish between coercion or taxation and actual trade and things. And that's why this guy, he says you should own your home free and clear. Well, what about if you hire a bunch of people who the state says don't have permission to work? Well, I'm sure that they would have no problem with trying to work in some sort of asset, so-called forfeiture, into, depending on how big your operation was and how much they think you've stolen from the good people of the United States. Not the citizenry, of course, but the government. So, they released this on May 1st. Largest joint immigration operation in Florida history leads to 1,120 criminal alien arrests. Now, criminal alien, you know, they're lumping all this together, and if you read down here, this is how they do it. So, arrest included 378 criminal illegal aliens with final orders of removal issued by immigration judge. Officers arrested various violent offenders, gang members, sex offenders, fugitives from justice, and those who pose significant public safety threats. Okay, but how much of the total was that? Arrests include members of several different notorious. So they're just saying, look at all this good we did, but really they're not telling you, or at least yeah, they don't tell you how what percentage of these people were actually violent people, because I'm going to say most of them weren't, just because on the whole most of society is not most people in society are not like violent criminals. So just kind of by like, and it's really easy for these people to use this propaganda to get people like, well, if you're going to come in here illegally, of course you must be a violent criminal. Why wouldn't you just come in legally? Aside, discounting the long wait, and of course the fact that the state claiming that it has the right to stop people from entering is an ownership claim, right? So maybe they couldn't wait. Maybe they had to move on with their life. Well, then they should have done it in their own so-called country. And it's like, I've got lots of videos explaining how that's just communist bunk. But, I just wanted to draw light to this propaganda as how they tell you all these bad people that they got, and it's like, okay, sure, yeah, violent people need to be dealt with, but that's not really what this is. This is people that they perceive as trespassers and thieves of the state, which they then use propaganda to get you to think are thieving from you, when really it's the politicians who are thieving from you to begin with. And then yeah, they will hand out welfare to entice people to be feel ingratiated to the state, and then support further state intervention and things like this. That's all true, but the Magacrats and nationalist, collectivist, socialists are caught up in this same loop. They haven't actually exited the paradigm, right? They're just caught within a collectivist economic outlook where they need to maintain that collectivist framework, and the way that they do that is they have to regulate where people are allowed to move. And on that anomaly post, somebody had said, go after the employers, make it impossible for them to work. And I'm just like, I mean, how do you envision the state doing that, right? Like, you've become a totalitarian socialist. Like, there's no other way to do that. I mean, I guess there could be a way where you give tax incentives, but at that point, again, they're just caught in the paradigm. Just give tax incentives anyway, and to everyone, and also stop thinking that you need state permission to live, buy property, or work, because that is essentially collectivist socialism. So, that's redundant essentially, but yeah, that is state socialism, most especially. Definitely not free market economics. So it's just mind blowing that they can go on TV and say this, where he's essentially likening it to rent, as opposed to extortion, and then he can also, just a little bit prior actually, launch this largest joint immigration operation. And what that means is state goons run around and seeing if you have your papers or not. Man, that's literally what it is. People think that that's like hyperbole, and it is meant to shock, and it is meant to invoke those concepts. Whereas, they're not yet openly as brutal as the Nazis were. And I'm not going to say that they're necessarily racist, and ultimately I don't think that has anything to do with it. Ethnocentric, xenophobic, maybe, and that obviously people who are like that probably are more likely to be racists. I would imagine that the numbers would back that claim up, though I don't have any idea of any such numbers. But I mean, it makes logical sense. You can. I wouldn't blame a guy for inferring that, but they're definitely National Socialists. I mean, their whole. I remember several years ago. It's probably a long time ago now, more than several, maybe 8. It was several years after I first became an anarchist. Ann Coulter, rather, she basically was making the argument that deportations in such a manner as this, which now that I'm kicking this around in my head is interesting. They were kind of egging up to that, or working up to this. That it's good because it boosts the domestic wages, and I mean, you're making basically that state imposed scarcity is a good thing. And within the collectivist framework of their economic nonsense, yeah, that makes sense. It's just they're overlooking the ethical implications, the violations of property that inherently contains. Because I mean, they think that we're just going after these trespassers, and it's no. The whole premise is that you're telling everybody who they can and can't hire, who has government permission to work. People can't even work without government permission, and people are outright saying that at this point. So how would just the question is with how would you not realize that you are basically a totalitarian socialist? They just have not implemented this to that extent yet, which they are basically are at this point. Just because they're not literally standing in your business at every moment dictating how much you have to buy and sell for and all of this, it's still the same principle, right? The state is claiming the ultimate right to control who can enter the so-called commune, which the Republicans ironically believe is all of our collective property, but somehow they're not socialist or collectivist, which the more crazy right-wingers who basically openly admit that they're national socialists will admit that. But it's just mind-blowing. This propaganda is getting, and it has been for a long time, and I got pulled away, and life has been crazy. So there's been so much stuff I could be picking apart. It's just insane out there. But I mean, there's really no shortage. I guess you can pick up anywhere, and there's going to be something like this. You should own your home free and clear, says the man who lives off taxation. Okay. Like, if I don't pay your salary, your goons come and take my stuff anyway, bro. You might not take my house, but I don't really think I mean, look at his face here. I don't think he thinks that deeply about this stuff, right? So, anyway, yeah, just more National Socialist nonsense that people who don't understand freedom, and I would like to say, okay, it's good that this rhetoric is getting out there, but then we go to this, and it's like these people really have no idea what they're talking about, which we all understand that. Democrats sort of understand that. They can make a few good points against them, but of course we all know that the Democrats believe basically the same stuff, which is interesting because um, you know they can't see the collectivism in Trump and all of these Magacrats and stuff. So it is just it has been the propaganda and the state has been put on steroids in the 12 or 13 years since I've become an anarchist, because I mean it was mind blowing at first, and it became old hat for a while, right? It was just like these people are, politicians are nuts, people are confused, and now it is just like it's amping up. It kind of leveled off, right? Once you realize what the state is, and it's like, okay, you just go through life trying to avoid that monstrosity and be a decent person, and it's like it's really like not. They are really trying to prevent people from being able to do that. But yeah, all right. On that note, once again, MAGA, confused National Socialists, completely self-contradictory, right? You should own your home without paying property tax, but if you hire people at your business or invite people into your home who don't have government permission to be on the commune, then, maybe they'll take your home anyway. In fact, they'll show up with men with guns, and if you have the audacity to think that you own that property and have the right to tell them to get out because, you're just having dinner with some guy from somewhere else, they will shoot you. So